Did they teach you how to read in your stinking slums?
At Wexford's Classics reception, donors and reporters watching, Vance turned to the night janitor and laughed. Malcolm Preston set down the mop. Black, 33. He met the professor's eyes. Vance's smile thinned. He didn't like being looked at.
What's with that look, black monkey?
I received a proper education, Professor.
Who gave you, stinking black monkey, the right to talk back to me?
If you can read, then he became angry and pulled out a piece of ancient Greek paper and slid it across the marble floor with his shoe, like a dog bowl.
$500,000 if you can read it, meathead!
Malcolm didn't flinch. He bent and picked up the paper.
As you wish.
Vance had just made the biggest mistake of his career. But let's go back 90 minutes, because the slide of that paper wasn't the first time Vance had pushed Malcolm Preston that night. It was the fourth. Malcolm had clocked in at 6, pushed his cart down the marble hallway of Humanities Hall. 8 years he'd done this. 8 years of mopping after the wine receptions, lifting empty glasses, wiping the prints of men who never looked at him twice. The first push came at 6:15. Vance walked into the hall, bourbon in hand, on his way to the reception. He passed Malcolm's cart, did not slow, let his coat flare against the mop handle and knock it to the floor. A young grad student behind him stopped and picked it up, embarrassed. Vance did not turn around. The second push came at 6:40. Inside the reception, someone spilled Cabernet on the long oak table. Vance snapped his fingers in Malcolm's direction without looking.
You! Towel! Now! No name, no please, the way you'd call a dog to fetch.
Malcolm stepped in, handed him the towel, stepped back out. 2 younger donors at the bar exchanged a look. Neither said a word. The third push came at 7:10. A junior professor told a joke about a student who couldn't tell Homer from Hesiod. Vance laughed loud and turned toward the doorway where Malcolm was wiping the trim. Even the mop boy over there knows who Homer is, doesn't he? Doesn't he, meathead? He did not wait for an answer. He turned back to his friends and laughed harder. Sarah Holloway, 3 years into her PhD under Vance, set down her water glass. She had been watching for 2 years. She slid one hand into her coat pocket and pressed record. The fourth push came at 7:30. Vance, 4 bourbons deep, started lecturing a pair of trustees about falling standards at Wexford, about the kind of people the university now lets through the door. His eyes flicked toward Malcolm twice when he said the word kind. Malcolm kept wiping the trim. His hand did not shake, but the rhythm of the cloth slowed by a half a second after each insult. Nobody in the room stopped Vance. Not one of them. That was the silence that was about to break. The paper was in Malcolm's hand. The room was watching. Malcolm did not unfold it immediately. He pulled a clean white handkerchief from his back pocket, laid it across his palm, and rested the paper on top, the way you hold a document that is older than the room you are standing in. A few faculty members noticed. One of them, an older woman near the bar, narrowed her eyes. The mop boy was treating the paper like it was 3,000 years old. Because it was. And the way Malcolm Preston held it told you he knew it. Malcolm read it silently first. 10 seconds. His eyes moved left to right across the lines of ancient Greek, then back, then settled. Then he lifted his head, and he began to read aloud, not in the broken syllables of a man sounding out letters, in the cadence of a man who had lived inside that language. The breath in the right places, the stress on the right syllables, the rise and fall of Attic Greek the way an actor on the stage at Epidaurus would have spoken it 2,400 years ago. A visiting professor from Harvard, who had flown in that morning for the reception, slowly removed his reading glasses. He did not put them back on. A graduate student near the doorway leaned toward her friend and whispered something. The friend did not whisper back. She was watching too. Malcolm finished the first sentence. He paused. Then he kept going. At the back of the room, the old woman by the bar dropped her hand from her wine glass. Malcolm finished the last line. He let the silence hold for a moment. Then he translated the passage into English. Clean, literary, precise. The kind of translation that sounds like the words were written that morning. He placed the paper gently on the nearest table. Sophocles, he said quietly. Antigone. Lines 332 through 336. Would you like me to continue, Professor? The room did not move. 80 people. Not one of them spoke. Vance tried to laugh. It came out wrong. A parlor trick, he said, memorized off the internet. Anyone can mimic a sound. Malcolm did not raise his voice. If it were memorization, Professor, I wouldn't have noticed that line 3 has a transcription error. The verb should be in the middle voice, not active. The copyist changed the meaning of the sentence. Across the room, a young graduate student opened her laptop. She typed, she read. She lifted her head. Her eyes were wide. She whispered to the person next to her, and the person next to her went pale. Because that exact passage, with that exact transcription, had appeared in a peer-reviewed paper published by Reginald Vance the previous spring. With that exact error. The whisper moved. Through the cluster of faculty near the bar, through the donors by the window, through the 4 reporters from Classical Quarterly. Sarah Holloway, 3 rows back, was the one who had been assigned to proofread that paper 8 months ago. Sarah had caught the error. Sarah had flagged it. Sarah had been told by Professor Vance that she wasn't quite ready to challenge an established translation. Sarah had stayed quiet. Sarah had stayed quiet for 8 months, and the silence had been eating her from the inside. She stood up. Her hand went into the leather bag at her side. She kept it there. 2 of the reporters stopped writing in their notebooks and started typing on their phones. One of them sent a message to his editor with a single line. Margaret Sutherland, chair of the donor council, sitting in the front row holding a glass of Pinot Noir, set the glass down on the table. She did not pick it up again that night. Vance's face had gone the color of old paper. The bourbon glass in his hand was trembling. The shine on his forehead was not from the lamps overhead. He opened his mouth to say something. Nothing came out. The room was silent. Malcolm Preston stood with his hands at his sides, the paper resting on the table where he had placed it. And to understand what had just happened, you have to understand the boy who had read it. Malcolm grew up in Roxbury, the neighborhood north of downtown Boston, where the bus stops are scratched and the libraries close early. His mother was Lorraine Preston. She worked as a school librarian for 22 years. Every summer, when the city libraries discarded their old stock, she came home with boxes. Mismatched, water-damaged, sometimes missing a cover. She told her son the books didn't care who owned them, only who read them. By 12, Malcolm was reading Homer in translation under the kitchen light. By 15, he had taught himself ancient Greek from a 1960s Loeb edition, the kind with the original Greek on the left page and the English on the right. He'd cover the English column with an index card and translate from memory. His mother kept the index cards in a drawer. Full scholarship to a small New England college, top of his class. Admitted to Wexford's doctoral program in classics at 22. And then, at 25, his thesis advisor, a man Malcolm had trusted for 3 years, took his dissertation research and published it under his own name. A revolutionary redating of a Sophoclean fragment. When Malcolm went through the formal channels, he was told he wasn't a culture fit for the program. He was pushed out without a degree. His advisor died 2 years later. Took the truth with him. Malcolm's mother told him, "The library doesn't ask for a diploma." So at 27, Malcolm Preston walked into the Wexford facilities office and applied for a night janitor position. Not for revenge, because the staff badge gave him access to the archives after hours. For 8 years, he had been studying under the lamp by himself after the 11 o'clock shift. His mother died 5 years ago. He was 28. She didn't live to see him standing in the reception hall tonight, but she had taught him exactly how to stand there. For a long moment, nothing moved in the marble hall except the second hand on the brass clock above the doorway. Then the room began to shift. Not all at once, the way a tide turns. A senior faculty member near the bar, a woman named Eleanor Tate, who had served on Vance's tenure committee 15 years ago, slowly set her drink down. The dean of the classics department, 3 rows back, did the same. Vance forced himself to laugh again, louder this time. He needed the room back. "A clever guess," he said. "Anyone with a passing familiarity with Sophocles could spot a metrical anomaly. It does not make you a scholar. It makes you good with patterns. There is a difference." He looked around for support. He did not get it. The graduate student with the laptop turned the screen around. She did not say anything. She did not have to. The classical quarterly issue from last spring was open on her screen, the abstract right at the top. Reginald Vance, a reconsideration of the Antigone choral fragment. 2 of the reporters leaned in to look. One of them photographed the screen with his phone. Margaret Sutherland. The donor, who had set her wineglass down, rose from her seat in the front row. She walked across the marble hall. Slowly, deliberately. 80 pairs of eyes followed her. She stopped at the small table where Malcolm had placed the paper. She picked it up. She read it for 30 seconds, in silence. Then she turned to Vance. "You published this passage," she said, not as a question. Vance opened his mouth. "And you have just told a room full of donors and reporters that the man who corrected it is a parlor trickster." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The visiting professor from Harvard finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "He is right, Reginald. The middle voice is the correct reading. Frankly, I am a little embarrassed I did not catch it myself last spring when I peer-reviewed your paper." A small sound moved through the room. Not laughter. Something tighter. The Harvard professor sat down again. Vance's mouth was open. He shut it, opened it again, tried to find the smile he had been wearing all night. It was not there anymore. The bourbon glass in his hand made a small clicking sound against his ring. He gripped it harder to make it stop. He turned back to Malcolm. "Who do you think you are?" His voice was lower now, sharper, the kind of voice a man uses when he has run out of safer weapons. "Walking into this department wearing that uniform and lecturing the chair of classics? You think one party trick makes you my equal?" Malcolm did not answer. He picked up his mop, calmly, slowly. He turned to leave the room. Vance stepped in front of him. "Don't you walk away from me, boy." The word landed like a stone on the marble floor. 80 people heard it. The Harvard professor closed his eyes. Margaret Sutherland turned her head 2 inches and stared at Vance like he was a specimen she had not finished classifying yet. 2 phones were still recording. Sarah Holloway, 3 rows back, still standing, slid her own phone slightly forward in her bag so the microphone had a clearer line. And Reginald Vance, 4 bourbons in, with a peer-reviewed mistake projected on a graduate student's laptop and a Harvard professor sitting back down behind him, was about to say something much worse. Vance leaned in close enough that Malcolm could smell the bourbon on his breath. "You think the badge they gave you means you belong here?" His voice was low now, tighter, the voice of a man who had stopped checking who was listening. "Wexford used to mean something. Used to mean rigor, standards, a certain kind of mind." He looked Malcolm up and down, slowly, like he was inspecting a piece of equipment that had broken. "Now they let in your kind to mop the floors, and we are supposed to treat you like colleagues when you get clever for 30 seconds with a piece of paper. The kind of people this department now lets in through the door is the reason this institution is collapsing in real time." The word kind, then the words your kind, said twice, 3 sentences apart in a room with 4 reporters and 2 phones recording. Margaret Sutherland set her wineglass down for the second time that night. She did not pick it up again. She did not pick anything up. She just stood there, watching. The Harvard professor stood up, quietly, picked up his coat, began walking toward the door. The dean of classics, a man named Henry Lawford, who had spent 20 years defending Vance in every faculty meeting, finally looked away. Vance saw the Harvard professor leaving. He saw Lawford turn his head. He saw the donor council chair refusing to meet his eyes, and he lost what was left of his control. The bourbon, the humiliation, the 30 years of being the loudest voice in the room, all of it came out at once. He used a word that no man of his education and his position should ever say out loud in public in this century. He said it without lowering his voice. He said it to a black man in his own university's marble hall, in front of donors and reporters and his own students. He said it twice. Then he told Malcolm to get out of his sight, to get back to the broom closet, to remember his place. A junior trustee at the back of the room, a black woman who had joined the board the previous year, closed her notebook and put it in her bag. She was no longer taking notes. She was making a decision. The notebooks of the classical quarterly reporters were filling up with shorthand, and then Malcolm Preston, who had not raised his voice once that evening, picked up his mop. He folded the handkerchief in his hand and slid it back into his pocket. He looked at Vance directly, not in anger, not in pity, just clearly. The way you look at someone you have already finished being surprised by. And he spoke, quietly. One line, in ancient Greek. He did not translate it. He did not need to. A few people in the room understood it. The Harvard professor near the door paused with one hand on the handle and closed his eyes. Sarah Holloway, who had read Sophocles in her first year of graduate school, slowly sat back down. Malcolm nodded once. "Have a good evening, Professor." He turned. He pushed the mop cart down the long marble hall toward the service corridor. The wheels squeaked once on the polished stone, then again, then faded. The door clicked shut behind him. Vance was still standing in the middle of the room, bourbon in his hand, mouth open. He had no idea what Malcolm had just said. Not one person in that room was going to translate it for him. Malcolm finished his shift in silence. He mopped the men's room. He emptied the trash bins. He restocked the soap dispensers. He locked the supply closet at 11. The hallway above him was still full of voices. He could hear them. 8 years had taught him exactly how loud a faculty reception sounded after it had been broken open. 8 years had taught him exactly how to walk past it without turning his head. He clocked out at 11:15. He drove home through Roxbury in the rain. The apartment was dark when he opened the door. He did not turn the kitchen light on. He did not sit at the table. He walked straight to the bedroom closet. There was a cabinet under the lower shelf. He kept it locked. Not because anyone else had ever been in this apartment to look, because some things you lock for yourself. He turned the key. Inside was a small wooden box. Inside the box was a black notebook, sewn binding, the corners worn soft from 8 years of being opened and closed. He took it out. He set it on the kitchen table. He turned on a single lamp. He sat down. The notebook was his mother's last gift to him. She had given it to him the week he started at Wexford as a janitor. She had said one thing when she handed it to him. When people don't believe you, the record is the only witness you have. He had been 26. She died 2 years later. Malcolm opened the notebook now. The first page was dated September of his first year. A single line about a faculty member who had said something at the loading dock. Names, time, the exact words. The second page was a week later. The third, 2 weeks after that. By the end of year 1, the notebook had 93 entries. By year 8, it had 144. Most of them were about Reginald Vance, but not all. There were entries about 3 other black staff members Vance had quietly pushed out of the department between 2018 and 2023. There were 11 graduate students, 9 of them students of color, whose names appeared in the column where Malcolm had written grade complaints and recommendation refusals and meeting minutes nobody else had bothered to record. They were the names of 3 former students of Vance's who had finished their doctorates elsewhere and were now teaching at other universities. Malcolm had stayed in touch with them. They had been waiting 8 years for somebody to ask the right question. And at the back of the notebook, taped to the inside of the cover, were 2 printed screenshots. Emails Vance had written. Emails Malcolm had seen the night Vance forgot to lock his office computer. Malcolm did not have to look for them. He did not even open the back cover. He turned to the first blank page he could find. He picked up the pen his mother had bought him with the notebook. He wrote the date. He wrote 1 line under it. Tonight, for the first time, someone else was recording too. He closed the notebook. He set the pen on top of it. He sat at the table and looked at it for a long time. Outside the window, a taxi went by. The headlights swept across the wall and lit up a small framed photograph on the shelf. His mother, standing in the elementary school library where she had worked for 22 years, holding an armful of books. She had told him the library does not ask for a diploma. She had not told him what to do when the library finally asked him a question. He was about to find out. By Sunday morning, the video was everywhere. Daniel Brennan, a junior faculty member hired the previous fall, had been the second person to start recording on Friday night. He posted the clip to academic LinkedIn at 6 in the morning on Sunday. By noon, it had crossed 20,000 views. By the time Dean Eleanor Whitmore poured her second coffee, it was at 80. The audio was clear, the camera was steady. The slur was unambiguous. Whitmore was 61 years old. She had been Dean of the College of Humanities for 9 years. She had been a classicist herself before the administration. She had read Sophocles in the original Greek the same way Malcolm Preston had, quietly, by herself, at a kitchen table, decades earlier. At 8:15 Monday morning, Sarah Holloway knocked on her door. Sarah carried 4 things in her bag: the original audio recording from Friday night, her own video file, a typed list of 11 graduate students who had agreed to give statements, and a draft Title VI complaint with 7 signatures already collected, including her own. She set them out on the dean's desk, one at a time. "I have been watching this for 3 years," Sarah said. "Friday was the line. I want to file." Whitmore did not speak for a full minute. She read the list. She listened to 30 seconds of the audio. She watched the video twice. Then she looked up. "Have you spoken to Mr. Preston?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't want to impose this on him. It is his life, not mine." Whitmore nodded slowly. She placed both hands flat on the desk. "Give me 24 hours. I need to talk to him first, before any of this leaves this room." Sarah agreed. That same morning, 2 floors below, Reginald Vance was making different calls. He convened a closed-door meeting with 2 of his oldest allies, Theodore Ashcroft, the vice chair of the department, and Henrietta Ashworth, the director of graduate admissions. He laid out a defense. The video had been edited. Malcolm Preston had entered the event without authorization. Sarah Holloway had a documented personal grievance with him. Ashcroft nodded too quickly. Ashworth said nothing at all. Vance made one more call to the director of facilities. He expressed concern that Malcolm Preston had been spreading misinformation and loitering in the archives without permission. He suggested that the department was no longer comfortable with Mr. Preston's continued assignment to Humanities Hall. A reassignment notice was placed in Malcolm's locker that Monday afternoon, effective immediately. New post, the athletic complex on the opposite side of the campus. Night shift, far from any book. Malcolm opened the locker at 6 p.m. He read the notice standing there. He did not slam the door. He did not crumple the paper. He folded it once. He slid it into his back pocket. He picked up his mop cart. He finished the shift. He sat in the empty stairwell for 15 minutes on his break and did not move. Upstairs in her office, Dean Whitmore was waiting until 9 o'clock, when she knew Malcolm would be alone in the basement break room, to walk down and find him. She did not know about the reassignment notice yet. She was about to. The basement break room had not been renovated since 1978. Fluorescent lights buzzed, the vending machine hummed. At 9 o'clock on Monday night, Dean Eleanor Whitmore came down the back stairs carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. Malcolm Preston sat alone at the corner table, a folded paper in his back pocket, both hands flat on the table. She put 1 coffee in front of him. She sat down across from him. "Mr. Preston, I am sorry I did not come down sooner." Malcolm nodded. He did not say anything. Whitmore did not rush him. "There is a complaint being prepared. 7 students have signed. Sarah Holloway is leading it. Before that complaint goes any further, I wanted to ask you a question." She waited. "What do you want?" Malcolm sat still for a long moment. He looked at the coffee. He looked at his hands. Then he reached into the canvas bag at his feet. He pulled out the black notebook. He placed it on the table between them. He pushed it across to her. 8 years, he said. 144 entries. Dates, exact words, witnesses. 3 former students of his who are now teaching at other universities. They are waiting for somebody to ask the right question. 2 screenshots of emails I saw the night his office computer was left unlocked. I did not look for them. They were there. Whitmore opened the notebook. She read the first page. She turned to the middle. She turned to the back cover and saw the printed screenshots taped inside. She closed it. "Mr. Preston, do you understand what this notebook can do?" "I do," Malcolm said. "I have been writing it for 8 years. I know exactly what it can do. I just had not decided yet whether I wanted it to." He reached into his back pocket. He took out the folded reassignment notice. He set it on the table next to the notebook. "Until this afternoon." Whitmore unfolded the paper. Her jaw tightened, a 1/4 of an inch, enough that Malcolm saw it. She picked up her phone. She called 1 number, the director of facilities. She used 6 sentences. By the time Malcolm finished his coffee, the reassignment had been rescinded. She put the phone face down on the table. "If Sarah and those students stand up," she said, "will you stand up with them?" Malcolm answered without hesitation. "Yes." Whitmore held the notebook a moment, then slid it back across the table. "Take this home tonight. We will need it tomorrow, not before." She stood up and walked back up the stairs. Malcolm sat alone in the basement break room with the notebook in front of him. For the first time in 8 years, he was not the only one writing it. The video crossed 240,000 views by Tuesday afternoon. Daniel Brennan had posted it to academic LinkedIn at 6 on Sunday morning. By Monday at noon, the video was on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. By Tuesday, it had jumped the academic walls entirely. The clip was sharp enough that you could hear the bourbon glass clink against Vance's ring. You could hear the slur clearly. You could hear Malcolm Preston reading Sophocles in flawless Attic Greek to a tenured chair of classics. By Wednesday morning, an editor at Inside Higher Ed had called Sarah Holloway. Sarah refused to comment but confirmed the recording was real. By Wednesday afternoon, the Boston Globe ran the first story. Tenured Wexford professor faces Title VI complaint after viral reception incident. 3 of the 4 classical quarterly reporters had been interviewed for the piece. All 3 had taken contemporaneous notes. All 3 had filed the story to their own outlets that same morning. Sarah Holloway walked into the Title VI office on Wednesday at 9. She filed the complaint. 7 signatures. Malcolm Preston walked into the Title VI office on Wednesday at 10:30. He filed his own complaint. He attached the black notebook as a supplementary exhibit. Within 24 hours, 3 additional complaints arrived. Independent, unsolicited. All from black former students of Reginald Vance. 1 now teaching at the University of Michigan, 1 at Spelman, 1 at the University of Toronto. They had been waiting 8 years. Then the staff complaints came in. A custodian Vance had pressured into transfer in 2019, a graduate teaching assistant who had been silently moved off his rotations in 2021. The director of human resources opened a file. The file got thicker every hour. The investigation was formal by Thursday. The evidence stacked.
2 videos, 2 camera angles, time-stamped. 1 audio recording, clean. A notebook with 144 dated entries, every one of them cross-referenceable to internal records. 11 graduate student statements, 3 professorial statements, 1 staff statement. 5 years of grading records that, when run by a quantitative analyst from the School of Education, showed a 0.6 GPA gap between Vance's black students and the rest of his roster, a gap that could not be explained by any academic variable. 2 emails from Vance's own university account, content unprintable in this story, metadata confirmed by IT. By Friday, exactly 1 week after the reception, the Chronicle of Higher Education ran a follow-up piece. The hashtag Wexford Silence trended in the academic community for 48 hours. Black alumni, 2 and 3 decades out, posted their own stories about Reginald Vance. A pattern that had been quiet for 30 years became loud in 72 hours. The American Philological Association opened a parallel ethics review. On day 10, Margaret Sutherland wrote an open letter. It ran on the front page of the Boston Globe online edition. The donor council, she announced, was rescinding its $3 million pledge to the Wexford Classics Department effective immediately. She named Reginald Vance directly. She named the night she had stopped picking up her wine glass. She named the dignity with which Malcolm Preston had stood his ground. The letter was the moment the story stopped being a video and became a story. Vance tried to fight. He retained a private attorney. He went on the offensive. He claimed the video was selectively edited. He claimed the slur had been taken out of context. He claimed Malcolm Preston had a documented vendetta against him dating back to a personal grievance 8 years earlier. It was the worst mistake he could have made. Because when his attorney filed that defense, it dragged the entire 2015 dissertation theft into the open. The doctoral committee records, the culture fit letter Malcolm had been given when he was pushed out, the fact that the dissertation Vance's deceased mentor had published under his own name in 2016 had, in fact, been Malcolm Preston's work first. The Wexford Provost's office opened a second investigation, academic fraud, stretching back nearly a decade. Then Henrietta Ashworth, Vance's own director of graduate admissions, walked into Dean Whitmore's office unannounced on day 15. She brought a banker's box. Inside the box, 5 years of internal memos, email threads, decision records, evidence of a systematic pattern of discrimination Henrietta had witnessed and, by her own quiet admission, failed to act on. She gave it all up. She did not ask for protection. She did not ask for clemency. She asked only that the records show she had finally turned in what she should have turned in 5 years before. Theodore Ashcroft, the vice chair, stopped answering Vance's calls. The investigation closed at 8 weeks. The Title VI office found a substantial pattern of racial discrimination. The Office of Academic Integrity found credible evidence of academic fraud. The Faculty Senate Committee on Tenure convened on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, by a vote that was not close, Reginald Vance's tenure was revoked. It is the rarest outcome in American higher education. It happens on average fewer than 3 times a year across all 4,000 accredited institutions. It requires misconduct so severe and so well documented that the institutional reflex to protect its own collapses entirely. It collapsed at Wexford in 8 weeks. He was fired the following Monday. His pension was forfeited on the academic fraud finding. Oxford University Press and Classical Antiquity Press both pulled his books from publication. The American Philological Association revoked his fellow status. 2 universities he had quietly applied to, Virginia and Wisconsin, rejected his visiting scholar applications within the same week. His wife filed for separation in the 4th month. His name was quietly removed from 2 endowed lecture series. The brass plaque outside the classics seminar room, the one that had carried his name for 12 years, was taken down on a Saturday morning by the same facilities crew that he had once called to push Malcolm Preston out of Humanities Hall. He left Boston in the 5th month. He moved to a town in Vermont where nobody recognized his name and nobody asked. He had been the loudest voice in every room he had ever entered. Now, when he ordered coffee at the diner on the corner, the woman behind the counter called him Sir and did not bother to remember it. 5 seconds. A paper slid across a marble floor with the tip of a shoe. That was all it had taken. 10 weeks after the reception, Dean Eleanor Whitmore invited Malcolm Preston into her office. There were no reporters this time, no cameras, no witnesses. Just 2 coffees and an afternoon's worth of quiet. She did not offer him anything. She did not apologize for the institution. She did not promise to make him whole. She asked one question. "What do you want, Mr. Preston?" Malcolm answered without hesitation. He had been thinking about this for 10 weeks. "I want to read. I want to teach, if I can, and I want something to carry my mother's name." Whitmore opened a folder on her desk. She pushed it across. Inside was a printed copy of Malcolm Preston's 2015 doctoral dissertation, the one his advisor had stolen, the one Wexford had buried in a rejected materials archive for 9 years. Whitmore had pulled it out. She had read it twice. She had marked it in pencil where she had underlined the passages that had taken her breath away. She did not say anything about the underlining. Malcolm did not say anything for a long time. He turned the title page. He read 3 lines of his own handwriting from a decade ago. His throat moved once. He closed the folder again and set both hands on top of it. "I cannot give you 8 years back," she said, "but I can give you this." What Wexford announced over the next 3 weeks did not undo what had been done, but it was the closest thing to repair an institution can offer. A full research fellowship for Malcolm Preston, effective immediately, with an office on the 3rd floor of Humanities Hall, unlimited archive access, and a clear path to completing his doctorate within 18 months. His 2015 dissertation was accepted as the starting point, not the end. A teaching position the following semester. Malcolm would lead a graduate seminar in classics, the first one of his career. An honorary doctorate to be conferred at the spring commencement alongside the formal one when his dissertation was defended. The establishment of the Lorraine Preston Chair in Comparative Classical Linguistics, named for Malcolm's mother, the school librarian who had taught him to read the Loeb editions at 15 by the kitchen light. Malcolm would be the chair's first occupant once his doctorate was complete. And the Lorraine Preston Scholarship, 2 full graduate scholarships every year for first-generation students in the classics and ancient languages. Funded initially with a portion of the legal settlement Wexford was obligated to pay Malcolm Preston for the 2015 misconduct. Malcolm had requested that the entire amount be redirected to the scholarship fund. The check did not pass through his hands. Sarah Holloway was named his first research assistant. Daniel Brennan became his closest colleague in the department. The following week, Sarah, Daniel, and 2 younger graduate students came to Malcolm's new office with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Malcolm opened it slowly. Inside was the handle of his old mop. Sanded, polished, mounted on a base of walnut. A small brass plate at the bottom carried a single line. "For the man who was reading the whole time." Malcolm laughed once. Then he had to step out of the office for a moment. When he came back, he was still carrying the plaque. He hung it on the wall above his desk. Next to it, in a frame his mother had given him at his college graduation, was the photograph of Lorraine Preston standing in the elementary school library where she had worked for 22 years. For the rest of the year, every student who came to Malcolm's office for advising saw the mop handle on the wall and the librarian in the photograph and asked,
Every time, Malcolm told them. Every time the student left the office thinking about whoever had been overlooked in their own family. The rest of the spring did not slow down. Oxford invited Malcolm as a visiting scholar for the following term. Heidelberg asked him to consult on a contested fragment from a recent Cretan dig. The New Yorker published a profile titled, "The Man Who Read the Library for 8 Years." A documentary crew called Dean Whitmore's office. Sarah Holloway, who had been close to leaving the program in February, was offered a permanent research assistantship under Malcolm's chair. She accepted within an hour. By the 5th month after the reception, the first public lecture was scheduled. It was held in the same auditorium where the slide of the paper had taken place, Humanities Hall. The seats were full. Faculty, graduate students, reporters, donors. 3 custodians from Wexford's housekeeping staff arrived in their uniforms. Malcolm had invited each of them personally. He walked to the lectern with no notes. He wrote a single line on the blackboard. He wrote it in ancient Greek. He turned and faced the audience. "I said this sentence once before, in this room. Tonight, I will translate it." He picked up the chalk again. He wrote the English underneath the Greek. "Many things are wonderful in the world, but nothing more wonderful than man." The room was silent. Sarah Holloway, sitting in the front row, bent her head. Her shoulders shook once. She did not try to hide it. She was the only person in the auditorium besides Malcolm who knew exactly when that line had first been spoken, who had heard it, who had not been able to repeat it. Malcolm did not look at her. He did not need to. He spent the rest of the hour reading aloud, from Sophocles, from a Greek elegy about a son who carries his mother's wisdom into the world long after she is gone. He read both the Greek and the English. He paused at the lines that mattered. He gave the words the breath they needed. A graduate student in the second row was crying openly by the third passage. A custodian in the back row took off his glasses to wipe his face and did not put them back on. The visiting professor from Harvard, the same one who had stood up that Friday night and said the middle voice was the correct reading, listened with both hands folded in his lap. When Malcolm closed the book, he said one more thing. "This lecture is dedicated to my mother. She taught me that the library does not ask for a diploma. She was right, but she would have liked one anyway." The room did not applaud immediately. They stood up first. The applause came afterward, and it lasted a long time. Malcolm waited it out. He nodded once to the 3 custodians in the back. He nodded once to Sarah Holloway in the front row. He gathered his notes that he had not used. Then he walked off the stage the same way he had walked off the marble floor 5 months earlier. Unhurried, head level. Mop cart this time replaced by a leather satchel his mother had bought him for graduate school in 2007. The satchel still had her handwriting on the inside flap. It still said the same thing it had said the day she handed it to him. For the boy who knew the words before anyone asked. 6 months after the reception, Malcolm Preston taught his first graduate seminar. It was held in the same room he had once mopped after midnight. Room 312, 3rd floor, Humanities Hall. The chairs were the same chairs. The blackboard was the same blackboard. The brass lamps in the hallway outside were the same lamps that had been on the night Reginald Vance slid a paper across the marble floor with the tip of his shoe. 12 students sat in front of him. One was a first-generation student from West Baltimore, the first recipient of the Lorraine Preston Scholarship. One was a 35-year-old former Marine who had come back to school late. 2 were graduate students who had transferred from other departments specifically to study under him. Malcolm wrote the day's question on the board. What was Sophocles writing Antigone about? The room was silent. He waited. The student from West Baltimore raised her hand. She gave an answer that took the rest of the room 20 minutes to catch up to. Outside the university, Malcolm had started something else. A free Saturday lecture series held at the Boston Public Library, open to anyone who worked a night shift in the city. Custodians, security guards, hospital orderlies, kitchen staff, hotel housekeepers. Anyone curious.
The first session, 10 people came. The most recent session, 130. 3 of his regulars were custodians from Wexford's own dormitories. One of them, a 52-year-old woman named Charlene Davis, had started reading Plato in translation on her lunch breaks. She told Malcolm once, "I did not think this book was meant for me." It turns out it was. Reginald Vance's name was quietly removed from 2 memorial plaques in Humanities Hall during this period. The university made no announcement. The plaques came down on a Saturday morning, done by the same facilities crew Vance had once tried to use against Malcolm. On a Friday night, exactly 1 year after the reception, Malcolm left his office in room 312 at 9 o'clock. He walked the long marble hallway toward the elevator, the hallway where, 12 months earlier, a sheet of paper had slid across the stone and stopped at the toe of his work boot. The brass lamps were still lit. From somewhere below, the soft rhythmic hum of a floor buffer, the same sound that had been the soundtrack to 8 years of his life. He passed a young black woman pushing a cleaning cart down the corridor. She was maybe 24. There was a paperback novel tucked into the side pocket of the cart. Malcolm slowed. "Excuse me, I am sorry to bother you. What are you reading?" She looked up, startled. She told him the title. He smiled. "That is a beautiful book. I taught a section on its author this semester." He pointed back down the corridor. "I'm in room 312, 3rd floor. I'm usually here until 11. If you ever want to borrow anything from my shelf, you are very welcome to come up." He told her his name. She told him hers. Aisha. He kept walking. She stood there with the cart handle in her hands and did not know what to do with the rest of her body. Tonight, somewhere near you, somebody is carrying a whole library inside them. A custodian, a security guard, a grocery clerk. Somebody pushing a cart down a long hallway. Look up. Say hello. Ask their name. Support scholarships for first-generation students in the humanities. The next Malcolm Preston is mopping a floor right now, waiting for somebody to ask the right question. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. Tell us about somebody you once underestimated, or somebody who once underestimated you. Like, share, subscribe. There are more stories like this than the world has ever known. $500,000 if you can read it, Meathead. It was the last sentence of a 30-year career. It was the first sentence of a new one.
The story is over, but one thing keeps sticking with me. We usually believe that when something wrong happens, the right move is to speak up immediately, confront it. Anything less feels like weakness, like letting them win. But this story taught me something different. Sometimes the strongest move isn't speaking up fast, it's writing it down and waiting. Think about it. For 8 years, nobody would have believed him if he had spoken up in year 1, year 3, year 5. He had been called bitter, difficult, not a counterfeit. The world wasn't ready to hear him that. So, instead of shouting into a room that wasn't listening, he did something quieter. He kept a record, date by date, word by word. He didn't fight the silence, he documented it. That's what I keep coming back to. We are taught silence equals defeat. That's if you don't push back in the moment, you have lost. But that's not always true. Sometimes silence is strategy, a person waiting for the right witness, the right moment, and when it finally comes, they don't have to remember anything. It's all on paper. So here's a lesson. If you are in a situation right now where nobody believes you, write down anyway, days, words, weaknesses, not for revenge, for yourself. So one day, when the world is ready to listen, You don't have to rely on memory. The truth doesn't always win when it's shouted. Sometimes it wins because somebody was patient enough to write down. If you had been in that room, would you have spoken up? I read every comment, hit like, subscribe. See you next time.